However, now that the African ethnic communities of South Africa are emerging as powerful, independent economic and social entities, both forms of leadership elite are also emerging. And as an American business person, you need to know about the importance of each of these elites to your business plans. As an example, let's say you're a mid-sized American company joint venturing with a South African company to build a small manufacturing plant. Many American business people, and you may or may not fit this picture, are accustomed to thinking of a workforce as a large number of separate individuals, hired one at a time, from which a team or set of teams is then created by training, supervision, and management. In South Africa, as in most of Africa, teams are a very different matter. People may come into the recruiting office one at a time, and they may not look like a family or a community to you, but they are. Moreover, this family or community already has its traditional leaders and its modern leaders, and the opinions and decisions of both these elites will directly affect your workforce on a daily basis. In Africa, the workplace is viewed as an extension of the life of the community, not as a separate place where for part of each day the worker's individual labor is owned by an employer. When African workers go to work, they don't leave their community behind. The workplace is simply part of the community. Among other things, this means that people who influence your workforce most strongly and directly probably won't work for you. They're going to be somewhere else in the community. And to make things even more difficult, they may not even look like leaders to you. Foreign plant and business managers in South Africa are often dismayed to find that some of the elderly people they see hanging around in front of perhaps rather dilapidated houses on their drive to work each morning turn out to have more say-so about what their employees will and won't do on the job than they do themselves. Now, for many Western business people, especially those with a national colonial heritage in Africa, which includes most Europeans, both the traditional leadership and the community are actually invisible. Because of these cultural blinders, many of America's European competitors have real blind spots when it comes to African leadership and organization, a fact which can give a sophisticated, observant American some very significant advantages when doing business in South Africa.
The black community, the village, the tribe, is very, very interconnected. It's almost as though each person has a string connecting every other person in the tribe, and if one individual moves, then they all feel the tug. That is really essential for an American business person to understand. Those kinds of sociologic relationships go beyond the family sitting around the table at home in the evening. They go beyond the neighborhood. They go into the workplace. So if indeed you have a facility and you're employing a number of these individuals, you have to understand that you're not employing separate, discrete individuals, but a whole sociologic village or large family. They talk with one another, they depend upon one another, they are indeed highly interdependent. That can be used as an advantage for you as a business person. It can help, definitely can help with your disseminating information, with your getting information from your employees. If you ignore this fact, you will be, you may not be hurt necessarily, but you will be at a disadvantage when it comes to really understanding and knowing how to best utilize your workforce.
Another closely related aspect of traditional African society, which successful American business people must factor into their business thinking, is the role of the chief. Now, Americans tend to think of chiefs as rather obvious and easily identified ceremonial figures. In other words, we tend to think you can tell a chief by his robes and ornaments. We also tend to think of chiefs using old movie stereotypes, whether those stereotypes are Native American or African. Well, those images couldn't be more wrong, or, from a business and management point of view, more potentially costly and troublesome, especially when you take labor relations into perspective. There isn't just one chief in an African society, but a hierarchy of chiefs. Some titles are inherited, but many of them are bestowed by the community upon people whose judgment has come to be accepted, whose vision is seen as clear, and whose knowledge is accepted as sound. Let's say you're being shown around a warehouse by your new South African distributor. Well, that African man standing over there in the corner of your distributor's warehouse, dressed just like the other workers, maybe a little on the shabby side, it might be hard to see him as a chief. But that's how he sees himself, and more important, that's how everyone else in the warehouse sees him. And it's also how he is seen in the community. When you're introduced to him, don't fail to take time to speak with him, to show him the proper respect, and most importantly, to remember his name. Because from that time on, when you come to South Africa and visit your distributor's warehouse, you must take the time to visit with this and the other chiefs, to inquire into the welfare of their families, and to ask about the workers.
It is not always easy and simple to spot the African chief, although there are many and they're always around, and they can be driving a Mercedes and they can be walking long distances because that's the only means of transportation they have.
To illustrate this principle from another angle, let's say you're beginning to roll out a new product line in South Africa. Well, members of the traditional elite have a major impact on acceptance or rejection of many different kinds of consumer goods. How do they come to have such influence? It's really rather simple once you think about your own cultural biases. When Americans think of a market of, let's say, 10 million people, we tend to think of 10 million individuals. Our plans generally involve how to reach and influence each of these 10 million people individually, because we intuitively know that people make up their own minds, right? Well, it doesn't occur to most of us that there are societies where most people in a community are going to be deeply influenced by what just a few people say or think, or where many people in a community actually turn over decision-making powers on a social and moral level to a few people who don't even hold official office. Now, we might believe we can account for such people when we talk about opinion leaders and influencers, but in the context of African society, we don't begin to describe the special powers of the few over the many with these Western marketing terms. So if you're rolling out a product line in South Africa, be sure that your focus groups include members of the traditional elite and the modern elite, and then listen closely to what they do and don't say about your proposal. It's in attention to details like this, which may be invisible to others, where American business people can gain significant long-term competitive advantage in South Africa at very little cost in dollars. So take a close look at the emerging black leadership of South Africa today, and take a look at the business sector where your interests lie, and you'll see that there are two kinds of authority displayed in every institution and organization, with technical and financial authority resting largely in the hands of the modern elite, and political and social and moral authority resting largely in the hands of the traditional elite. It's important to know also that these two elites don't necessarily get along well personally or share common agendas. There are still a lot of suspicions, accusations, and just plain bad feelings left over from the days of apartheid, when many members of the modern elite did reasonably well financially and socially, if not politically. While older, less vocal, and in many cases less educated than the modern elite, the traditional elite is a powerful force in black South African society. Any American thinking of doing business here must come prepared to identify and build relationships with key members of both elites in whatever business sector you're dealing in. American business people who understand the role of elders, chiefs, and moral authority in South Africa will gain a significant advantage over those who focus strictly on technical issues and who deal strictly with educated, westernized African counterparts.
There's another distinction that we might not realize being Americans, is that the blacks among themselves have a racial issue. There are blacks that are considered black Africans, and then there are coloreds who are considered to be the light skin or straighter hair Africans. And there's a major distinction there. I've never seen anything like it before. I myself would be considered a colored, simply because my hair is straight, my skin is a light brown, you know, and it's a major distinction. And you have all of that to contend with, for instance, in your advertisement and your messages and things like that that you're sending out. So you want to really make sure that you're reaching the broad spectrum.
As part of the rediscovery of African cultural roots, Americans are becoming familiar with the principle, it takes a whole village to raise a child. While most African Americans are of West African ethnic origins, a core reality of all African cultures is that this idea that it is the role of the village or the community as a whole to do many things which are done in Western societies by distributing functional responsibilities among organizations and institutions. Some of the roles fulfilled by community-based extended families in traditional African society includes educating and socializing the young, policing the community, creating public works, and regulating trade. Perhaps the most important thing for American business people to understand about the African extended family concept is that in that family, the economic welfare of each individual is tied to that of all other family members. Not only do individual paychecks frequently support large numbers of people, but people who hold responsible positions in business organizations, such as middle-level management for a foreign company, are subject to requests, demands, pressures, and obligations from large numbers of family members, many of which will have an impact on your business bottom line. Traditional African communities celebrate the role of work, productivity, and creativity, and there is a very strong work ethic in traditional South African society. As you can imagine, generations of exploitation and oppression have sapped much of this traditional sense of pride in hard work done with skill. However, as South Africa emerges into a democratic, market-driven society, the African traditions which support pride in work will rekindle. Along with this pride will emerge those other values which lie at the core of traditional African communities: honesty, loyalty, and putting others first. American business people have a key role to play in nurturing and then benefiting from this emerging pride and productivity. Many businesses in the emerging South African market have skill, energy, commitment, and people, and some even have capital. But what many new and many not so new South African businesses need in order to be effective partners for you is training and mentoring. There are virtually unlimited opportunities for American businesses able to mentor and train their South African associates sensitively and effectively.
In partnering a South African firm, in many cases one will find that some of the basic skills of business are not there. This would be particularly in the accounting business process side as opposed to the selling end of the business. I think the important thing here is that when one is setting up one's joint venture, that you have a very clear and open dialogue between what the roles of the two partners is going to be. And if training is necessary, come straight out, discuss it openly. And most South Africans are only too pleased to get education, training and development that would develop their overall business skills and their ability to compete in the marketplace.
There's another perspective which, as an American, you may find helpful when approaching the South African market. Traditional African societies have been almost exclusively agriculture-based, and South Africa's major peoples are no exception. In agricultural societies, members of the family provide unpaid labor for most of the year, but when harvest time arrives, there's always a need for extra hands. Traditionally, the people who provided this labor in traditional societies expected not only to be paid, but to be welcomed, to be appreciated, to be thanked, and to be fussed over as special, because they were offering such a necessary service. Indeed, African land-owning families employing temporary farm workers still make a big fuss over them, feeding them the best there is, often moving out of their own house temporarily so that the workers can sleep in comfort. Now, since this is how people who work for others have been treated in traditional African societies for many generations, it should come as no shock to an American business person to discover that your African employees or associates want not only to be paid or given a good deal, but they want to be fussed over and appreciated. Experienced American business people find that African workers are traditionally both loyal and honest. Now, if this sounds a little too much like positive stereotyping, reflect a bit on the life experience of people who have been brought up in a traditional African style, surrounded by both love and discipline from every adult in the community, and seeing respect go to those who earn it with work that reflects skill and intelligence. Recognition by their peers, formal acknowledgement of their accomplishment, and meaningful titles and certificates all can play as strong a role as salary increments and bonuses in motivating African workers and management. With these points in mind, you can see that American and European pay-for-performance schemes might benefit from including a pay-for-loyalty factor, and that management by objectives programs might beneficially include management by relationship. What this all means for you as a small or mid-sized business person is that your ability to be creative and flexible in supporting, motivating, and rewarding South African employees or the employees of associates will pay off in an environment where so many big foreign companies are locked into rigid and culturally inappropriate compensation and motivation schemes.